All right.
Now recording.
All right. And every time I forget, there we go. There's where I turn him off. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back, dear listeners and watchers. It feels weird still to me to add that to my usual sort of spiel. But regardless, this is Will and Jerod Make a Game. I'm Will, and the other guy.
Hey, I'm Jerod.
Uh,
And we are Will and Jerod. Make a game.
Yes, indeedy. I'm from Gamenomicon, which you guys probably already know at this point if you've been listening. If you haven't, search us up on Itch or Drive Through RPG or Threads or any of those various platforms, uh, and you will find a handful of games. Jerod works with me on several projects, but also has his own stuff. And where would they find that?
You bet. You can go to Proxism by Design, either .com, which is just my website, which has all of the links that take you onto RPG Drive-Through or itch.io. And pretty much everything is going to be under my first and last name, Jerod Leopold. But we're both working on a lot of really cool projects right now. I know that we've caught up on our recording. Will should is in the throes of completing. Is that where we're at for your project, Lords of Terror?
Yeah, yeah. Lord of Terror is in the layout stage right now. I think I've already learned several things, right? Because this is the second thing that I have laid out in Affinity, right? I've laid out a bunch of like one page stuff in Word, as in Microsoft Word, because it's one page. But I think I'm definitely learning a lot more, getting some advice. Gotta say, RP that we interviewed on here lately has been a great resource. Kind of bounced some issues
Oh,
off of
fantastic.
him that I had. So I've been kind of tweaking some of the layout stuff, and I think in reordering some pages so that things like the 20 entry tables are on like facing pages only and don't like run over or anything like that. I think that's going to necessitate a little extra writing here and there to fill out some other pages more, but yeah, we're down to the home stretch. I think this week I'm going to try to knock out the extra little bits of writing that I should just expanding current entries to take up a little more space.
Yeah.
And then be able to hopefully send that off to print next week if things go well. I don't know. I really ought to get the whole doc together though, and still have somebody else other than me look at the whole document. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, other than that, we're also a month into the Tension Engine game jam, and for a couple weeks there, my brain was on fire with ideas for the project I was working on for that. Thankfully, I made myself quit working on that for a little bit after hammering out two-thirds to three-quarters of a game and like four different cover ideas. So I'm making myself go back to Lord of Terror, so I can actually fulfill that for everybody waiting on the Kickstarter. And that, of course, is on top of what we've got going on here with Will and Jerod Make a Game, both the podcast, the videos, and of course the game itself. So there's a lot to juggle on this side, and I know Jerod stays. If I had to guess, I would say at least twice as busy as me. What do you have going on?
Well, one thing that I want to say about the layout stuff is that I did government contracts for a couple years, doing like the reports and whatever. And you're absolutely right. Like it's, I took classes. I know your basics. You're like your basics of layout, but man, there is something special when you get something just right and you put it on the page and you're just like, oh yeah. Like what I was doing was fine, but then you learn this
Yeah.
one little thing and you're like, oh my God, it's so much better.
Yeah, yeah, like, now that actually looks professional or something like that, or at
Yeah,
least
absolutely.
I hope it does to other people. Yeah.
But yeah, as far as projects I'm working on, yesterday I actually got to do some more play testing for I'm working on a mini campaign for Pellegrin Press, Mutant City Blues,
Nice.
superhero game. It's much more like it's 40 pages about superpowers, and then 100 or 200 and some whatever pages rest of the book about how to run a police procedural. It's like totally
Oh,
supposed to be your Hill Street Blues, your Law and Order. Like it's much more about the forensics of the crimes and solving that. It's a
okay.
different take for superheroes. It's really fascinating to dig into. And yeah, I'm working on a mini campaign for that. I've got part one and part two already written and did some play tests for it. And if fingers crossed to help out with our current project, I know you mentioned about doing interviews. Fingers crossed, we'll get one of the main people who helped put together Pelicon, which was Pellegrins
Oh, nice.
Press, um, online only convention that basically took the place of Gen Con because they stopped doing their
Oh.
online RPGs, right?
Yeah, yeah, this year they, canceled, have retired, maybe I should say, the Gen Con Online that had started up
Yeah.
during COVID. Although, speaking of, we're recording this, the Monday right after Gen Con,
Yes.
everybody, so I had to wear my Gen Con shirt, if you can see the dragon there.
Nice. We'll have to talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
Um, so doing the Peloton was fantastic, and the people who ran it, put it together were fantastic. I want to give a shout out to the Raspy Raven crew that also helped me get involved with it to be able to run that. So yeah, putting together Mutant City Blues mini campaign to be able to put up as either maybe possibly a Kickstarter. The project's going really well, so that may be a lot bigger than what I originally intended. I've got those two jams, one for RP and then also for the Wound by Tension, which I figured out I'm going to be doing kind of a Wild West cursed thing. You're
Okay, so, like, Deadlands-ish?
a
Doomtown kinda
Deadlands
vibe?
adjacent. Yeah, Deadlands
Okay.
adjacent, except you're all creatures slash people from all around the world that have a natural curse. Like, so you're a werewolf, you're
Oh.
a shaman, a skinwalker, or whatever. And whenever your tension pool explodes, you trigger your curse, and everyone has a curse.
Oh. So
So
everyone has a separate, like, tension. Ooh, I like that
we're gonna see
twist.
what happens. I don't know if
I
it's gonna
like
work,
that.
but we'll test it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's part of, the fun of these jams is, getting people to just kinda throw spaghetti at the wall with some of these systems, so to speak. Which, speaking of, I didn't actually mention what mine is. It's Sandman, Vertigo Comics inspired stuff. So, lots of, relationship heavy things, and I've got some ideas on how to tie that into tension, like screwing up relationships.
Yep. And Will has shared a couple of his covers that you've worked with, and both of the ones that you kind of posted up on your Discord looked awesome. It really gives that feeling of that Image Comics, Vertigo
Yeah, Vertigo. I
comics
mean,
from the
modern
mid
image
90s.
feels like it's the spiritual successor to, like, the 90s Vertigo, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. They look fantastic. So yeah, we're all getting knee deep in these projects, but we're also very much dedicated to keep working on uh, Honor Bound, and that's the other thing that
Exactly.
I've been really working on as well. Is that since we started really putting together and got the rules together, I've been putting together a every other Sunday playtest group for Honor Bound, and I've actually recorded most of those. So I've got 8 episodes that I'm going through right now and seeing like what worked, what didn't work, what can I post, what can I not post. I think I might just put it all out there. And it's fascinating to see that the very first episode is something that we've completely changed
Yeah.
already, right?
I mean that hooks on to what I think I wanted to talk about this episode. Well, actually, there's two things. We're probably very probably going to do two episodes here, but for the first one, I wanted to talk about kind of based on the playtesting and writing and stuff. There's been some chatter and some work done about cutting things that just weren't weren't working or weren't fitting or were too long. I think is probably the more accurate description for most of it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get some thoughts then on kind of there is the adage right about what killing your darlings or whatever, which I think to some extent has to do with this type of editing process, but some of this at least I hope is not killing it, right? Like I think there's some thought about maybe kicking some to a second book that might be another goal. How do you envision it? This is it all stuff that's just being cut completely, or how's that looking?
Yeah. No, great question. A little bit of A, a little bit of B. I mean, some stuff we've just had to dead and bury it. Not much. It just didn't work. And even that stuff, I can't say that it's been completely cut out. I think it's something that you just put on the shelf or you keep working, right? Okay, so let's say, like, in the analogy of like you're a welder or metal worker, right? Like you've
Okay.
got this piece of metal, you know what you want to get out of it. You start with the shape of it. And there's one thing very in particular that I wanted and that I still haven't quite gotten right. It's close. I know it's really close. And so I just put it off to the side, brought it back, got rid of it completely. And then what ended up happening is that it just came back in a different form. It and so I don't know like what what do you call it when you kill something and it keeps coming back, but
A
just differently?
zombie?
Like, yeah, is that what
Pet
we're doing?
cemetery? I don't know.
Are we pet cemeterying our ideas, our darlings? Is that what we're doing?
I love it. I love it. And that actually kind of gives me a thought here of Pet Cemetery, right? A big theme of that is kind of unintended consequences. And so I'm kind of curious when you say that some of these things come back in different forms. I guess maybe there's two pieces to this. One is as things have been cut, have we been finding that there were unintended consequences kind of downline of that being missing that like necessitated something very similar to be brought back, or along with that, once something has been brought back, has that kind of kicked off a domino that like, well, okay, never mind, I did decide we do really need this piece, but now that this is back, this other thing over here needs to go.
Sure. I can talk very specifically about one of the mechanics that we wanted earlier on. It wasn't quite working, then we kept working it until it turned into something that's totally different. And that's the personal sagas,
Mm,
where you make your character, you make the background, and you push a little bit on like your, I don't want to call it like your deep, dark, secret background or whatever, but you have something
your
in your past.
dramatic background, maybe not necessarily
Yes.
dark, but dramatic.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe where I ended up with the framing of the words. Yeah, exactly right. It was like your dramatic past or something like that.
Yeah, something close, I know.
Um, and so with that first built out, like I had the people, and it's in the first episode that I could post for actual play. I think I might have cut that part out. But like 20 minutes of it where people really going through and like you picked out who your rival was, you picked out what kind of your own side goal was with your character. Like one of them was to pay off a debt. Someone was like, well, I was trying to get back with a spurned lover. One person was like, I just have a straight up rival. Like we're both spies, and for whatever reason, like we were both just neck and neck in spy school or whatever, and then we got back onto the real world, and it's just gotten worse, you know?
I'm just picturing Spy versus Spy, the old
Yeah,
cartoon.
yeah, right. Um, And so that was really cool. That was a great, I'm like, all right, cool. Let's really work this in and make it happen. And what I found out was that the first iteration of how the game was put together, it was too clunky. We couldn't smoothly bring in those backgrounds. Like, because I was doing like, well, maybe we'll just do like flashbacks. Like, we'll stop here, have a flashback. And it was that screwed up the flow of the game too much. And then I was like, well, what if we make it mandatory? Would we do a rest period that you have to talk about your background? Like, well, that just seems too forced. Not everyone wants to play that way, right? Like, I don't want to
Yeah.
do that. Like, we're shaping the game how we want. We talked about it a couple episodes ago about like the experience points and how that really
Hmm.
helps focus on what kind of game we want to play. It also lets the players what they want to play, and it's not going to be for everyone, right? Like, to play our game, we're going to meet a lot of middle ground of folks that want to be able to help build some world building, which I think is
Hmm.
a pretty broad interest group, but I know some people that just have no interest in it. Like, well, maybe it's not for you. But the same with like these personal stories. And so I really kind of cut those out of the process of how we were playing the game. Like, they existed, they were just there as flavor. And then when we really went back and started talking about experience points, it became a moment for me, an aha moment of like, all right, well, if we're going to give out experience points to help out for world building, why can't we do that? Like, if you introduce a complication to a scene, and that complication is your background story, I'm going to give you an experience point, right?
Perfect.
And it's just something that wasn't working. It kept grinding the gears. It slowed up play. Put it away, came back, played without it for a little bit, came with the experience point thing. And I was like, all of a sudden, it's like, holy cats, this works. So before it was a highly detailed background of like, oh, dramatic and all this stuff. It's like,
Hmm.
no,
Hmm.
we're not doing that. You make your character, you have a dramatic background, you give me one or two sentences on it. That's it. From that point, we will now just build on as we're going through the adventures. I don't want paragraphs upon paragraphs. I just want this is your current personal saga that we're going to build on and tell as we adventure.
Yeah. And I love the tweak there with the experience. Um, really, it's it's offering a carrot, right, and an incentive rather than it sounds like part of the initial like early hang up is that it was so structured. At least from what I'm hearing, I was not in the sessions, but that it was very structured and kind of time consuming to tackle that.
Yeah.
And the new version is maintains a lot of that spirit, but is just open ended kind of, and says, "Hey, here's your carrot. At some point, by virtue of wanting to eat, so to speak, you'll go for the carrot," uh, and that really streamlines it.
And it's made wonderfully up in the actual play when it gets introduced by a player where one of the characters is inside trying to talk to the arms dealer, basically trying to incriminate them for it. They're in this other lockdown area. The two other characters are forced to be outside of what's happening. And so one of the characters goes like, okay. And then just describes to me what happens. Like, this guy from my past shows up in the middle of this dusty street. Coley sets up like this gunslinger showdown moment. And at first I was a little bit confused because he didn't tell me he was using his fast trigger. I was like,
Uh-huh.
what is going on? And they're like, but then he like got into like the third or fourth sentence that described what's happening. And I'm like, oh, fantastic. He's pulling in his personal story. We're going to do a whole scene on this. Doesn't have to be super long. And what made it even better is that the other person that was there in that scene hooked it into his personal story too. And then now we just bumped up the stakes for what the final scene ended up being for the whole adventure campaign. It just worked wonderfully. It was so much fun too.
Oh, that's awesome. That's
I think
awesome.
if you give someone stick, a sharp stick, basically, and like tell them to have fun with it. They're eventually just gonna poke themselves, you know. Terrible analogy, but like I think it's the gamers and all of us that want to explore these dramatic moments that make things just so much worse. But that I think maybe the point of hero stuff, and I think maybe it really
Yeah.
helps out for the Three Musketeers theme too, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think so. That whole kind of heroic fiction, I think a lot of it hinges on things must get dark, get grim in some manner. Not gosh, not necessarily in tone, but in situation for your protagonists, right? So that
Hmm.
they can shine by overcoming it in some way. I mean, if you look at literally any formulaic superhero movie for the past, well, good gravy at this point, 20 years, right? They've got that exact same structure of, they, well, not exactly the same, but we'll go with the origin story to make it easy, right? Of the hero kind of learning their powers and their setup. Things get dark, they get knocked down, then they level up, so to speak, right? They learn a new twist, they get angry, that their loved one was threatened or whatever, and then they overcome it, and bingo, there's your arc. So I think you're totally right that's like baked into the genre and kind of what people want to see and do. So they inevitably set themselves up for those kind of complications, shall we say?
Yeah, and it's a great example of one of our mechanical ideas that totally got pet cemeteried, you know, whereas like this is the way it works. Oh, no, no, it doesn't. Gotta get rid of it, gotta kill it. And then it came back into something way cooler. You know, it's Pet Cemetery with a happy ending. Is that a thing we can do?
Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good. I gotta say, like now that I've heard it a few times as this episode goes on, man, do I love the idea of that, just of that terminology of pet cemetery. Something I really want that to catch on. If there's any other indie or small press folks listening to this, or heck, just players, anybody at all, please let's make this terminology
Let's
happen.
steal this and let's make it big.
Yeah, exactly. Whew. Well, that covers some of how things have kind of come, gone, come again, that type of thing. But I'm also kind of curious from a all of that is kind of in a gameplay perspective, but that's
Yeah.
not necessarily the only factor to consider when we're putting together a book like this. And I know we did a whole episode talking about kind of scope and size, and I'm curious how much that has weighed in. I'm curious on behalf of the listeners. I know we've definitely talked about how some of this we were going to need to cut based on size, but that's what I get for framing this as an interview with Jerod.
Right, so going back to that scope episode, I think it was the second one, I think. We wanted
I think you're
60
right.
pages, if I remember correctly. And I really like that idea of keeping it 60 pages. And I think it's a pretty noble goal eh, for two or three reasons. One, I think you, especially right now in the way of the indie landscape, if you can't make a fully engaging role-playing game in 60 pages that also gives a world that people want to explore in, you've probably gone way over your bounds for everything. I think people will easily say that if you can't create a role-playing game that's only 20 pages, you know, um, but we're a smaller press. We can't be the free leagues that have 300 pages of just this gorgeous world building stuff,
Hmm.
you know, where most of those books, from what I've seen and gotten, like I own a couple of them, and it's like, hey, here's the rules, and then here's the fluff and world building, which is amazing to do. But if we're going to stick at 60 pages, we can't do that. We got to try and touch on as much as possible. So, like, I know we're going to cut back on the species section
Yeah,
way more than
yeah.
what we originally wanted to. I know that much. Um, Still going to have a lot in there about species, but it's going to be shorter. Uh,
much shorter, and a ton of the mechanical stuff got jettisoned along the way from initial talks, which honestly at this point I even forget if that made it into one of the podcast episodes or if that was even before we started chatting about uh, possibility of really custom tailoring uh, everything basically.
yeah,
That
we got rid of
there's
that.
just not the space for that.
No, I love the idea of really making that available, but we changed our philosophy a little bit, right? We put the power more in the player's hands to be because of the confined space. The power of the world building in the species building and the cultural stuff is now much more into the player's hands, which makes it a much more wide open world to explore. So I think that's a wonderful way to look at it. And I think for me, it was a huge relief too,
Okay.
partly for cutting
Yeah.
that. I'd love to have all those mechanics. I'd love to have those all interact and puzzle it all together. But at the same time, I now can just give it to a player and be like, well, what do you want to do? You know, here's this outline. It's got like three
Hmm.
things that are neat. Because I think we got it down to um like kind of appearance, range, and like some other stuff. And then like after that, it's like, look, everything else is up to you. And we're just gonna give you these bare bones. And I think that really is gonna work for a system like this one that is also gonna help out for going exploratory stuff. So I know the species stuff, the worlds that we were gonna build, the planets,
Yeah.
gone. Like
That one kind of hurts. I was thinking about that sort of stuff, but
yeah,
I mean I understand for the size. I mean, geez, what's the obviously this is pre-layout and all that jazz. But just like the work in progress doc is what 74 pages currently. Um, and some of that is stuff I think that's been struck but not like it shows
deleted
as
out.
struck in the
Yeah.
document, yeah, but hasn't been deleted, and some needs rewrites and whatever. But like that just gives an idea of where it is currently. I know it does not have my adventure in it yet, so that adds what 10 pages probably at a quick guess for how long adventures have
Yeah.
been.
Zero
Um,
art is in
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
Like
Zero art.
we're now there's gonna be a couple pages of charts that are gonna knock out five, maybe 6 pages, but that's not gonna be enough for what we want to do, right?
Yep. Sorry, I'm
So
just laughing thinking about laying out charts.
oh yeah, yeah. Will expressed on the somewhere in the Discord here that charts are his new nemesis, basically.
Yeah, yeah, maybe I should not have taken a one-page game that's essentially entirely chart-based and then said, "What's the longest thing I can turn that into?" Turns out that needs a lot of charts.
Um, so like now, like the worlds that we're thinking of, the systems that we want to build, is that that's all going to be now put onto the players' plates a lot more. Like we'll probably put together like maybe a map if we're lucky enough to put like on the back page of the back book spine, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
Like, hey,
that's an
here's
idea
something
of
that's
placement.
cool. Yeah.
Uh-huh. I think a
So
lot of that world stuff but both in terms of space, well, length of the book. Sorry,
yeah.
space pun not intended. Uh but also in how it works with the player involvement. I think the big catch of a lot of stuff is just in hinting at it, at like raising questions. Don't detail everything, just say enough to make people like wonder about more. And bingo, if now they're wondering, then perfect. That's the juice they need for a game.
Yep.
And that takes way more space if you can do it right.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. Uh, Now, as far as darlings, that I don't know how you want to preface this part. Do you want to? There's a couple things that are just dead on the slaughter floor, unless we offer up something else. Do you want to talk about that at this point in
Oh,
time?
hmm. Interesting.
Because it's one of those things that at the very beginning of making this book, I had a very strong version of like, this is something that I want to make sure is in this book. In going through some of the playtesting process and also writing everything and how much I wanted to be involved in the iteration of the game, it would add like 20 pages, I think.
Yeah.
And so like for me that was I wanted to have like this guild house castles feeling to it. We talked about that a lot
Mhm,
early on.
mhm.
And I wanted everyone to be a part of this guild so that I can reenact these like the Musketeers versus the, Richelieu and his men. Um,
Yeah, what were his guards called? Now I should remember that
the
off the top of my head, but
Cardinal, so yeah, I mean, he was the Cardinal.
yeah.
It's it's funny. I'm in another game called En Garde, and they just threw me in prison. I'm the last Musketeer left, basically.
Oh,
um, the but the whole point is, I wanted as a group, as a communal guild house, to build it up in power. Like one thing our original D&D group really loved to do is like when we finally got a castle, got enough level and build it up and prestige and like building up forces and all that stuff. Well, in this world, it'd be about building up sciences and exploration and getting contracts and like building your way up to join ultimately the Grand
yeah.
Alliance. Or
Mhm.
to be so big that the Grand Alliance can't ignore you anymore and they give you some other designation. And as of right now, in the core book, it just can't go in. It's too
Yeah,
big. It's too
yeah,
big. Um, and there's a couple things that I'll take away the curtain a little bit is that at this point, by taking that, what we're talking about is cutting it down, doing the edits for content. I think that really brings us really close to having a complete, good-looking book. Like we're at 90% done for sure, but it's not
yeah.
last 10%, right? I know the professions I want to fill out a little bit more. I know we got to get those species, the language for species just right. Um, and yeah, there's two things that I'm working on. Like, do these even need to be in the book? And maybe you can help me out because I've had this question for a while.
Yeah.
So I figured out really good ritualized rules for dueling. Right? It's about
Okay.
a page and a half long of just like, here's different ways you can do dueling. Here's how it can work. There's a phenomenal example in the actual play. They fell into my trap. It was wonderful. Um, but now there's two other sections. I'm like, well, because we talked about space travel in flight, should there be
Mhm.
a section that's going to be 2 to 5 pages probably for like encounters while in space or like ship to ship encounters,
Oh.
right? So anytime you get to vehicle stuff, it starts to get a little pear shaped. And you
Mhm.
either just like wash your hands of it, right? And be like, hey, you just figure it out. Or you come with like, hey, here are the things you can do. Like you need to be able to grapple. Because I'm thinking like open air airships for the most part, right? Kind of Spelljammer-esque once you get to that stage. So there's like, we need to come up with this whole section for that? And the other section is when you're in the lakes doing the net running thing. And right
Mhm.
now, to me, that part is feeling really at odds as the rest of the world building that we've done so far. So I don't know how much of that belongs in this book right now. I love the idea, but I want to keep it in, but I don't know in what fashion. How does that stuff kind of sit with you? What do you think?
Gosh. I mean, I out of the three that you mentioned, I think dueling is a must, right?
Yeah,
In both um, theme that we kind of established for the setting, the inspiration for it, that type of thing. I think that's a must, and I think it fits. It it fits the current scope and the things that have been trimmed down that makes everything on a smaller scale, an individual person or individual like party, rather than like you said the whole guild,
Yeah.
which I think makes that one, like you've already done, an easy cut because it's a different scale from the rest of the game, which I
Yeah.
think makes it a great like topic for a separate book, which would at this point probably be 50% or more like finished writing. So I'm smelling stretch goal. um if I think about the other two, I feel like ship to ship stuff, and like encounter, travel encounter, that type of thing, um, probably runs into the same sense of scale issue, that's just a different scale than everything else that the
Yeah.
current book is dealing at. So my gut idea would be to shift it off. Now, thematically, does it necessarily connect with the guild level stuff, or are those now at two different scales and they don't match real well in the same book? I'm a little I'm a little torn there because I feel like it would be weird to split it into yet a third book, but it also doesn't quite feel like it's the same scale to me.
I think I can help out with this one.
Okay.
So when I put together that kind of information about guilds or whatever, I also gave every guild its own fleet.
Okay, okay.
So
So
not
that
very
could
big,
connect then.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can get to national fleets or alliance fleets or whatever. But every
Yeah.
guild has got like a handful of ships, including chargers for individual thing. So those
Mm-hmm.
those would be marriaged very easily
Okay.
in
Okay.
a similar
That's
one.
awesome.
But I really like what you
Yeah.
said there was the problems of scale. I think that's a really good way to look at it.
Yeah. Now, on that same scale front, at least what I understand our prior thought process on uh geez, why did my brain just completely shut down now
Weaving,
on the internet, the
yeah,
stuff? Sorry, what did we wind up calling the hacking?
weaving,
Weaving. Yeah. The
weaving the lace.
weaving, yeah, that I do feel is the same scale as the core book. Uh, so the question might be how much space is realistically needed for that. If it can be done in two or less pages like dueling,
Yeah.
if it is effectively internet dueling, so to speak, then I think that it only makes sense to me to try to find room to fit it
Yeah.
into the core book, that is.
Okay. I love that. I think that's a good way. As soon as you started talking about problems of scale and what and looking at that way, that really helped from that perspective to take a look at it. And this is another good example of may not always be able to work with another person on a project, but if you can have even just one sounding board person just to, hey, this is kind of what I'm thinking about, help you clarify some of your borders.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
would much rather have someone give me um, constraints rather than give me, here's what you can do, like
Yeah.
sky's the limit, because I can take those
Hmm.
constraints and I can work around them, you know?
Yeah, I
For
mean,
some,
limits build or breed creativity, right? So
yeah, I guess it works for me anyway. I so yeah, I think those are the big things that we're right now from the core book is like ship to ship. The guilds is a huge thing. Um, and so then that oh, and all the world building stuff, like all the planet building stuff.
oh, that extra. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, that potentially also does not feel like a huge stretch in scale to me for guilds, uh
yeah, I
to
agree.
include the planet stuff, because like I assumed, I mean, this is all about building guilds and guilds like expanding, so getting out to that multi-planet scale is a goal, I would think of
Yep.
theirs. So I think that could hook in there.
Okay. Here's my last thing narratively that I started playing around with, and then all of a sudden I realized we hadn't even talked about it beforehand, is this idea of free city states. So the whole thing we were going for is more of this guild, help everyone out alliance, confederacy is what we were looking for, right? Because they just got out of like capitalism bad, blew everything up, no more secrets. Let's try and share the AI profits, blew everything up, right? Let's
Hmm.
try and rebuild our societies and share everything. For whatever reason, I kept going back to this idea of the free city states for people that didn't join the alliance, because that should
Okay.
be allowed, right?
Y- yes. I
So
mean,
then,
non-optional joining definitely paints our kind of core group in a very different light than we were
right.
going for.
And I knew that's not the direction we wanted to go. We didn't want to have an evil empire. And so I'm like, okay, well, if we go with these free city states, what would they look like? I'm like, okay, well, it would be areas that can fully sustain themselves. They
Hmm.
don't need help, or if they need help, they have a resource that they can readily trade to get that said help.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be bigger areas, and I'm just calling them the free city states now, free travel between everywhere. It's just that the laws within the city walls are different. Not by much, but you better go with some money, like localized money.
Right. Right.
Um, and yeah, and so I was really playing with that idea, and I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to build this up into this area. And then I'm like, wait a minute, does this go into the core book? And how much would we have to talk about it?
I don't know. We maybe don't have to talk about it a lot, but I mean, you already know the real broad sketch outline of the adventure that I was looking at with some natural disaster and needing to resettle stuff
Yeah.
and some kind of political stuff. And now you're talking about these free city states, and I'm like, oh, perfect. It's one of the free city states that's about to be hit by this disaster. Like
Oh, yeah.
that's why there's a big political like question of do we let them in kind of thing? Like, oh yeah, I think you just I've got a hook onto that now. So it's got to be included at
Okay.
least a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. And I also think it brings a lot more intrigue too, because now we can have spies that
Yeah,
fully
yeah,
have a reason for existing besides just guild to guild.
yeah. I mean, and
Okay.
theoretically, lets you do fun stuff. I mean, I wouldn't blow a lot of space in the book detailing it, but several of these city states maybe are people that specifically wanted a different um, form of government or society or whatever, and so some of them could be very maybe some of them they just I don't know wanted a monarchy or whatever, and it's
Yeah.
pretty run of the mill other than just they wanted a monarchy. And maybe some of them are very um you know hive minded almost, you are worker drones in the machine of this city. Like there's a whole range that the different ones could be, which I think opens up a lot of fun space for it, especially if they're not all detailed. But
Yeah.
a ton of fun space for GMs and for play groups to just be like, oh, we need a group to come into conflict or whatever. Let's do this weird idea we've got.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so too. All right. So then, can we officially say then, can we talk about the idea then of like, here's all these cool ideas that we've got that are not making the core book anymore? Does this, like you mentioned, going into maybe a stretch goal for
Hmm.
a second, uh, like right now I'm calling it quote unquote the campaign book. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's quite the right framing for it, but maybe it
Yeah.
is. What do you think? Is that something that we're going to be looking at?
I think we definitely should. I mean,
Yeah.
especially knowing how much, at least of the guild stuff, was already written
Yeah.
before you trimmed it. That's just such a huge start on the next project. It and gives not only some concrete ideas to talk about with folks and to say, hey, here's what we've got in mind for that goal, but it's notable progress toward it. Hey, this next book's already 50% done or whatever. Just I'm pulling numbers out of thin air here. These are not, please, nobody hold us to these, but say we set a 2,000 goal or whatever for
Yeah.
the main campaign, which would be reasonably in line with other projects I've run so far. If we set this stretch goal, to do a whole nother book, if we can double it, if we got 4,000, like, I
Yeah.
mean, that seems very reasonable to me.
So then, like, is it possible then to have like the second book? And this, I just thought of this because to have it be like 30 to 40 pages of rules, or like maybe 20 to 30, 20, say 25 to 35 pages of rules,
Okay.
and then 25 pages of a campaign.
Ah, okay, okay.
But we might, I mean, that's the other thing though, too. And this is all stuff that we just have to start getting to work. Well, I guess we've already done a
Right,
lot of the
right.
work already, but taking a look at it, layout and all that stuff
Yeah,
is what we have to really take a
right.
look at. Because the second book with the, let me take it up here, the campaign stuff, how many pages? Right now, that's just at like 20 pages, but that
Okay.
is bare bones, not filled out because we were just
Yeah.
play testing the rules. So,
So assume once it's like properly written, at least 30 then.
yep. And
So
then put
then,
in the planet stuff, put in um, the ship to ship stuff, and to build out the vehicle stuff.
mm, yeah.
Um, I mean, that's going to get us to 40, maybe
That's
right there.
that's what I was actually just thinking. So then I thought, well, in 20 or so pages, can you realistically have a campaign? If that campaign is what I'm used to thinking of as like multiple kind of linked
Yep.
adventures, linked sessions.
Hmm.
Whew, gosh,
I think it's possible.
that's tight.
It's tight. I think it's possible to run it as like a mini campaign where each adventure is like 5 pages long. Because what we discussed about, I think it was the last time we got together, is how like the idea of the spaghetti theory of writing adventures of or like
Ooh,
dungeons for uh this system specifically. Um so one of the play tests we went to a casino and like that's what the dungeons look like. And I know that we talked a little bit on the podcast about that. And so you can throw a ton of stuff at the players in a very centralized location. You can have multiple scenes in one area and call that a one session easily can be done there.
mhm.
Like the casino one, which is in the core book, like that's a casino heist, and that I think I got that down to 5 pages. I
Okay.
think maybe it's
I
six.
should probably reread that then. I'm probably overshooting a little bit when I guessed 10 for mine. I'm still thinking of them, I guess the way we've been writing party first adventures, and I probably
Yep.
ought to really get my brain more into slight a slightly different setup for Honor Bound. So,
Yeah.
yeah, if they can be done in more like 5, that that does free up a lot.
And I think this will also help inform the way we write party first adventures too. I really
Mhm.
do. I think they're also different systems though. The media res takes care of the first 3 to 4 pages of a party first adventure.
Fair,
You know, because you're
fair.
just knocking that out. You're like, nope, you're in the adventure. You're doing this now. Tell
Mhm.
me what you did to get here. Each with one action. Go. Great. Let's play.
Right, right.
So so yeah, I think it's pretty exciting. I think yeah, let's get that stretch goal for a second book. Um, I know you've got the Lords of Terror that you want to knock out first, which I totally agree with. And then because Pelican finished up, I was really waiting to get done running that Mutant City Blues adventure first before I started working on other projects. So the next thing that I'm really focusing on after this is Honor Bound in the two jams. Like
Hmm.
I work on Honor Bound at least an hour a day, at least at this point. And then once we start talking more about the end date, a lot more during a day. But
Oh, sure. Yeah.
um, yeah, right now I'm just gonna look at the jams and the to let people know. I know we talked about it. Well, no, I don't want to talk about this episode. So we're thinking about doing another episode. How are we up for
Yeah.
time?
Yeah. I think we're probably a solid 40, 45 minutes into this one. So I think that's probably a pretty solid episode.
Yes.
Thanks. Yeah, we did it. Thanks for following along with us, listeners
Kind of.
and viewers. Sort of. Yeah. We're all over the place. But that's uh, you know, part of the goal about this in general, I think, is to just give people some experience, some insight into this process, and
Yeah.
it turns out creative folks are all over the place.
And I hope this helps people like when they're working through their own projects. Because the next episode I think we're gonna do right now is talking about all the other kind of stuff we've done in the backgrounds to get to where we're at now, which
Yeah,
so many hats, man, so many hats.
so many hats. It's a great name for an episode.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, well,
Uh,
let's call this one, and we will see everybody in a little bit.
Heyo.
All right, mind if I hop up to refill my water?